Hey, my name's Jen from Apathy is Boring, Winnipeg Cohort 7. I'm interviewing Carter Brooks, and our topic today is going to be gender in hockey. Carter Brooks is the associate editor of Game On magazine, a news writer and sports columnist situated in Winnipeg, Manitoba. On top of reading and writing, his favorite pastimes include camping, car modification projects, and coaching hockey. His Twitter profile is cbrooksy84, and his content can be found on gameonhockey.ca. Welcome, Carter.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Life is good. Things are moving along the right way, and we got some sports back, so I'm happy.
Yeah, the Jets have moved further into the playoffs. That's super exciting.
Yeah, it's been a great start. See how things keep going here in the next couple weeks.
Alrighty, so let's get into our topic. So we're talking about gender in hockey today. So why are you passionate about this issue?
You know what? I've been involved in sports for pretty much as long as I can remember. When I was starting to walk, I was pretty much kicking a soccer ball. When I was starting to run, I was running with a football. Um, Hockey came along quite quickly in my life, and I got involved in playing sports. I have a younger sister. She very passionate as well. She played boys sports for the majority of her, I guess, teenage and young adult lifehood. It was a lot of coaching her. It was helping her out, whether it was football, whether it was soccer, whether it was hockey, and just, I guess, seeing some of the differences in male and female sports and how some of, I don't know, some of the changes that we've seen over the last few years have gone the positive route. So I'm very passionate about inclusivity for all, whether that's male, female, whatever it ends up being, but opening and widening the horizons as it comes to the current state of our game.
And what would you say the current state of gender in hockey is right now?
In hockey, well, you know what, there are a lot of avenues we could explore with this. Right now, looking at professional hockey, it's night and day, male and female. There's really nothing to compare. It's 100% male and 5 or 6% female right now. Just the breakdown as to what you're seeing when you turn on your TV, what you're seeing on the national level, what you're seeing in terms of pay scale. And that's just professional hockey I'm talking about, which is the overall end goal of many young athletes as kids. So when you're growing up in Canada and hockey's the game that you might be interested in, whether that is true or not, but that's Canada's game. So men just tend to have a bit more of a better percentage, a better chance of getting those opportunities to play professionally as they grow up. Whereas females, you know what, that option really isn't there. And that stems down to a lot of things, whether that's access to dressing rooms, change rooms as a kid, being able to play on the highest level team or not because they're a female, not a male. Whether that is funding going into um, some of these options for where you can play, education, and then junior hockey. Is there even a such thing as junior hockey in some places for women? There isn't. In a place like Winnipeg, we're blessed to have opportunities for female hockey players, but there just isn't quite enough. But that is a landscape that's changing. So I do think that we have been making the right steps forward over the last number of years. So there have been many positive changes. Uh, but right now, that you really can't compare male to female hockey just because it's just so driven towards the male side of things.
So you mentioned a lack of resources in some areas that just don't allow women to play hockey at all, at any
Right.
level. Um, and some maybe would argue that it's because there isn't a huge demographic of women playing hockey.
Mhm.
What would you say to somebody who says that these sports organizations for women aren't there because the demand isn't there?
Yeah, females are some of the most empowered, most gravitating, drawing factors that can provide resources themselves, that can build off of what they've been given. Um, Hockey, as we know it, was developed by men and has been primarily played nationally and internationally by men. But over the past 50 or so years, the uptick in female sports, including that of hockey, has really driven to new highs. So saying that the resources aren't there is definitely a contributing factor as to why maybe we aren't seeing it as nationally as we should be in Canada. Uh, I mentioned dressing rooms. It's kind of that's a resource too. You're looking at a typical hockey rink here in Winnipeg. You probably have four dressing rooms. If it's a rink built somewhere from 1950 to 1980, you got four dressing rooms. If it's built after that, okay, maybe there's even a second ice surface. But again, there's probably nowhere more than six dressing rooms. So alternating between ice times, you get two dressing rooms for one ice time. The next ice time starts 15 minutes after that ice time ended for the Zamboni to clean the ice. You get the other two dressing rooms. Usually, if that's a game, one dressing room, one team, one dressing room, the other team. If it's a men's or boys hockey, the whole team stays in one room. Perfect. If it's girls hockey, the whole team stays in one room. That's great. But then there's a problem if there's a female on the team. You can't really get a female to go into the boys' dressing room and change in front of them. That's just totally unacceptable. That's not how it works. When I was playing many years ago, we had a couple of females that were on our team, and they either whoever was the coach had to find them a bathroom stall somewhere, had to go maybe off to a soccer field, change in their car. Someone would carry them once they tie their skates over the cement flooring just so that they could get back to the room in time for the coach to give his little pep talk and speech before the game. So that's just something you might overthink. Like you might not even look at that as a factor, but just you know what, I'm a girl, I want to excel, I want to play at the highest level, and being able to do so kind of stems from having the access to facilities that the boys might have. Again, the same would be said if it was boys desiring to play on the female team, if that was the best team available. But that's typically not usually the case right now, because just the development process of guys being a little bit ahead of girls in hockey and sports at the very beginning stages. So again, resources come into it more than just money, but overall access to the facilities and the programs and the training. The hockey camps, you might see those pop up here and there. More often than not, it's male-driven, male-oriented hockey camps compared to that of the female hockey camps. Or if they are, they're announced as these are just for girls. These are women's hockey camps, where you might think, okay, maybe the competition isn't quite as high. Again, that's kind of the natural way people have been thinking about things. But I think that's a stereotype that you kind of want to break, that the level of skill and the talent isn't quite the same, where you know what? In a lot of cases it is. And we just don't see it as much as we probably should.
I think you bring up a really important issue of the change rooms, because not only is that a barrier to entry for women, it's a barrier to entry for people who don't fit within the binary, people who are trans,
Right.
or people who are just not comfortable with that sort of thing. So that brings me into my next question is, how do you feel about women, non-binary folks participating in the NHL alongside men?
Yeah, we haven't actually, as far as most of us know, we haven't seen that at the National Hockey League level. We have seen situations of that in some of the female leagues. And again, this kind of stems back to what we've seen over the last 20 years in the Olympics as well. There have been many situations where people are drug tested, they go through doping tests, they go through hormone tests in advance of participation as well as post participation. That's where we get lots of information coming out as, oh, you know what, this person cheated, this person's going to have an asterisk beside their name, this person's not going to, you know what, this record that they made isn't going to stand because they used this certain drug. And then we come into the conversation where, you know what, these people have gone through, maybe it's a gender transformation, maybe it's identifying under a different binary term, like you mentioned, where they stand in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed hasn't really been talked about at the national level. Uh, I think when a situation like that does arise, there will be a lot more conversation. We haven't seen that just because right now I think hockey has been very the junior ranks of hockey and developmental phases has been a lot more driven towards male dominance. So when someone starts to maybe come out, maybe give more information as to their gender background as maybe not being exactly fitting within the box, um, there are some noses turned up. There are some eyes look the other way. There's conversations that are had that might not be might not have been had otherwise. There are a lot of people who are participating in what the NHL is calling their diversity campaign. Hockey is for everyone. We've seen uh, things as simple as taping your stick with rainbow color hockey tape. We've seen things where different arenas, venues are hosting Pride Day nights, I should say, and getting people of all backgrounds and identities to participate in cheering, coming to join their team, participating with team colors, their own colors. There's a player in the NHL, Curtis Gabriel. He's very active on social media as to gender rights, and he posts a lot of content on inclusivity, what should be allowed, what isn't allowed, what's been frowned upon, and how things can change. He would be a good follow to check out Instagram, Twitter. He's very active in his platforms on this topic.
Awesome. So I think, yeah, you mentioned that just doing simple things that show that hockey is inclusive and that it is for everybody um, can really bring people together, just through their viewership, through audience, fans, but also through players and people who are hoping to enter some form of hockey league or play
Right.
recreationally. So that kind of brings me into our next topic. So in May 2020, you wrote an article for the Game On magazine titled Toxic Masculinity on Full Display in Winnipeg's Hockey Culture. In this article that you detail how, sometimes these hockey spaces aren't always gender inclusive and they're uh, more likely gender exclusive. So can you talk more about this article?
Sure. So it's over a year now, back in May, uh, there are a number of hockey players from Manitoba that I cover on a daily basis. I work as a reporter based out of Manitoba where I focus on hockey. So I get to know these guys pretty well. It's everyone from 12, 13-year-old phenoms that are looking like they're going to dominate hockey in the next number of years to retired NHL players and everything in between, male, female, junior hockey, minor hockey, professional hockey. And May of 2020 was interesting because there was a little bit of a revelation that came through hockey Twitter and really took the world by storm as to what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable on the record, off the record, private conversations or not. A number of high-level hockey players lost their jobs because of comments they made in an online Instagram group chat. And there were 10 players from Manitoba of all levels of hockey that were participating in this chat. And it was anything from hazing, teasing, name calling, to what some might look upon as horrifically misogynistic um, banter. It was not pretty. This conversation was screen capped by someone as a participant of this chat. Someone hacked into their phone and got screen caps of what happened in this conversation, and it dated back a year. And it's players commenting on fellow players, teammates, their wives, their girlfriends, people they know from the same community. Uh, it was not pretty. These players used very derogative terms, and that's just the very tip of the iceberg. This went public, and the teams that these players represented, whether that was National Hockey League teams, whether that was junior teams, they originally made just very brief statements saying this is unacceptable and we'll hope to help these players in the future. So a slap on the wrist. At that point, the players, a few of them that seemed to have their names unveiled in this chat, uh, they made statements on their personal social media accounts and said, you know what, yeah, this is a learning experience. We shouldn't do this. This is bad. Pity on us. Again, kind of not really something that anyone would ever want to read. So sometimes you have to dig a bit deeper as a journalist and find the real story here. And I kind of did that type of thing. And it ended up getting a lot of traction, and people got a lot of clicks and a lot of shares and a lot of views. And this story went pretty viral that these players really probably should be in line for a little bit more discipline than that. And sure enough, um, it ended up being that 3 or 4 of these guys had jobs revoked, contracts were terminated, they were shipped overseas, they had to find other work that just wasn't what they were comfortable with at the time because of a mistake they made in a group chat. You would think that something you do on your own private terms is okay, but when it's something of this nature and it's shared that publicly, it's not okay. So it's been a learning experience for everybody involved. I think I don't think there's anybody who could say, looking back on their phone, there's not a single message they wish they didn't send. Like that happens. But when you see a continued pattern of this behavior, that's when the trouble really begins to build up. And these guys, like, I feel bad for everybody involved. It was not a situation anybody wants to be a participant in, whether that's from afar, whether that's just reading this as someone from the outside, or being someone that these players were targeting because of maybe their weight or because of their identity or because of how they look. There was just a lot of things that just made your stomach shrivel up. It was not fun to read. It wasn't even fun to report on. Like there was no good in this except the idea that maybe someone has learned that these things are unacceptable. And saying someone, I show up everybody. This is a learning experience for so many people, and something that I think we'll all remember when you might have a thought come into your head. But no, you shouldn't say that. No, you shouldn't write that. You know what? Assess yourself, figure out the problem, carry on.
No, those are all good advice. That's all good advice. So in your article, you stated that there were players from both junior and national leagues participating in this online discussion chat, whatever it may be. How does this lack of leadership among professional players, how does this influence the attitudes of younger players? And how are they setting these, like, how can they set better examples for people who may look up to them?
Yeah, it's a little scary when you think of your idols and your role models behaving in such a way. On television, when you're watching a hockey game, you get an intermission interview, you get a post game interview, you might get a few of those. You get to kind of know what these guys are like. You might you think you get a relationship as a viewer, getting to know what this person talks about. But that's a lot of superficial stuff. That's a lot of cliches. That's just conversations that happen with a reporter in a public setting with a camera on you. As a reporter, I get to see a little bit more the backside of this. You get to see what these guys are like when I walk into the dressing room, when I see maybe what they're saying, talking about in the room. And typically it's all good stuff. Typically it's typical what you think of as hockey player dressing room talk, where they're arguing about something, they're figuring something out, they're looking to improve. But then there are situations where maybe it's something you shouldn't have heard. Maybe it's something you shouldn't have walked in on. And that's where it gets a little bit scary, that these things do happen. They happen everywhere in life, but when it's a role model that's being paid $5-10 million a year to do what he does, you'd hope for better behavior. Not saying that these guys involved in this certain conversation were making that kind of money, because they weren't. But those that should be held to the absolute highest of standards, especially when considering their actions have consequences, and those consequences kind of fall on the shoulders of the 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old youth that play this fantastic sport. If they see their role models behaving in a certain way, they'll probably act in a similar way. If they see what's considered or deemed acceptable, they'll probably follow that. Again, there's always the rebellious ones, and they want to do their own thing, which is totally acceptable too, and they'll live and learn consequences, as we've just touched on. But sometimes it becomes difficult to see the connection between, you know what, this is acceptable, this isn't, this is how I should act, this is how I shouldn't. Sometimes those lines are a little messy and it's foggy and it's hard to see. But again, things like this do help pave the way a little bit more clear for a picture that people want to see and want to follow and want to, you know what, kind of determine right from wrong. It comes down to a lot of the golden rule, right? Like it's, if you want to behave as a good person or not, there's a lot of it that comes down to making decisions on your own. But yes, leaders and professional athletes do have a big say in how kids of this generation and teenagers and young adults do behave.
Recently in media, yeah, we've seen powerful people, like you said, in hockey, people who seem to have a really, good future ahead of them, kind of have this, stripped away from them, from things that, these are inappropriate things to say, but these are also very young people, and they do make mistakes, and should they be judged their whole life um, because of this incident? And that's for the people to decide. But how do you think we can foster an environment of learning and unlearning? And yeah, I don't know how to phrase it. Like, how can we not ruin these young men's lives, but also still hold them accountable for the things that they're doing and saying?
Yeah, I think accountability is the key word in that phrase there. Uh, Understanding what is right from wrong again can be a little blurry. Maybe something that you see, something that you learn back 15 years ago isn't quite what stands up to the task these days. I know when I was younger, there were certain phrases you could say, you couldn't say, that didn't have any connotation on your career, your the way people look at you. It was just what you say. If you're cool, is what you said. If this went wrong, just a phrase or slang or something like that, and that's totally acceptable. Nowadays, things have changed. There's a bit more scrutiny. There are cameras everywhere. People have a cell phone in their pockets. You hardly find a person who doesn't have one right now that wouldn't be able to quickly pull it out and record somebody doing something. Um, we've seen it in many of the rallies. We've seen it in many of the parades. We've seen it uh, in situations where you might not ever want to have seen what you just witnessed on your social media platform. Uh, some of the discipline that's been handed down after such events is scary to see, that it's just, again, maybe just a slap on the wrist, or like in the situation I spoke of earlier, where it's a little bit of, you know what, we'll give him a slap on the wrist, but then that kind of comes back as a poor decision. Uh, and the decision's altered and more severe penalties are handed out. I think that is kind of where we'll see some of the change, as to, maybe it's better to have someone pay a little bit of a price, not making someone a guinea pig, or getting someone to take the full brunt of the blame, but someone deserving of a penalty probably should be given a penalty. It's much like hockey. It's sometimes the retaliator that gets the only penalty in a fight, in a scrum, someone slashes someone, they fall down, they get up and slash them back, they get the penalty. It's just the way of the pendulum sometimes. But I do think that discipline and appropriate levels of discipline will help contribute to how maybe some decisions are made in the future, knowing that, oh, he did this and he got this kind of, I'm staying away from that. No way I'm participating in that kind of activity, right? Maybe thought feel a little different in the brain, but that's how I think it might change going forward.
Yeah, but thank you for that. So I guess now we should switch gears. I know you want to talk about Ethan Bear and the
Sure.
conversation that you have with the Jets players. So we see how toxic masculinity has affected, women playing the sport, and just in general, the misogyny that is in hockey culture. But it can also present itself as racist behavior. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. We've seen in the past week uh, a situation surrounding Edmonton Oilers defenseman Ethan Bear. He is of First Nations background, and he directly caused a turnover on the Oilers that led to a Winnipeg Jets goal, which tied the game in Game 4. So again, anytime someone causes a turnover, gives the other team a goal, uh, it's not fun. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be remembered as that person. It happens almost every game. There's someone that is at fault for something. What this turned into was Ethan Bear's girlfriend made a post on her Instagram account, a story saying that, hey, this is not cool. Ethan and I have been subject to many racist remarks uh, stemming from what he did on the ice last night, and we're totally hurt by this, and this is not cool. And we want you to stop. That's the sum of it. And it totally got picked up on many news platforms, and conversations were started. Hashtags were started. There were conversations surrounding this behavior of racism, uh, to try to account for someone's behavior based on their skin color. They said, because you're of Aboriginal background, you caused this mistake. And it was absurdly inaccurate. It was absurdly disrespectful. And it ended up gaining so much traction negatively that it became a positive thing. The positivity is not what happened, but the positivity is the reaction afterward at the National Hockey League, the Players Association. Many players, teams, other representatives spoke out about this. I had a chance to speak with Neil Pionk of the Winnipeg Jets. I asked him what this was like to experience as someone who actually went up against this player just the night before, who was on the ice when these type of things, when this player skated. What was it like to wake up in the morning and read this, and how did you react? And he said, you know what, we 100% support him. We're with him through this. We're all a brotherhood. He has our full support. Our team is supporting him. The league is supporting him. There's no room for racial connotations to play any aspect in sports, especially a sport like hockey that's supposed to be one of the best out there, especially in Canada, because it's Canada's game. And he made a couple of good points that it's following along with the path that the NHL is trying to prove in inclusivity and hockey being for everybody. So again, it takes a bad situation to sometimes get a good reaction. So it's tough when this occurs, but it really serves as a wake-up call every now and then. You don't want to see it happen, but when it does, it's nice when you can kind of skew it to be a positive response, which I think this has become.
Yeah, the male leadership exhibited throughout this, unfortunate event really showcases how hockey can foster this, like you said, brotherhood among players, and hopefully a sisterhood as well. Um, so talking about race and the racism that Ethan Bear experienced, how is this also another barrier to entry for many who want to play hockey at a professional or junior level?
Yeah, we really don't see that many players of BIPOC background, players of color playing at that professional level. I think there's a stat out there. It's roughly 7 to 9% of the National Hockey League is of color. So that says a lot when you look at other sports like the National Football League, Major League Baseball, National Basketball Association. Those sports are almost dominated by players of color. So when you throw the argument out there saying they're not as talented, that completely goes out the window when you look at other sports. You can't base talent on skin color. You really can't base anything on skin color. Like it's not a fair comment. Uh, Looking at, again, hockey is the main point of focus here. The barriers are up, yeah, because you don't see many Asian folk in national hockey. You don't see that many Black folk or Aboriginal folk at the professional level. So just because someone's growing up and doesn't see someone that looks similar to them out there, that's a bit of a reason why they might not want to participate in that sport growing up, or want to continue to get better because maybe no one looks quite like them, and no one has the wherewithal to say, you know what, that's okay. You can be the groundbreaker. So some of that comes to coaching, parenting, familyhood, but a lot of it does come down to the individual that does want to make a stride going forward. We've seen a lot in the female side of things too. Bridget Laquette, she's from Mallard here in Manitoba. She's the first Aboriginal person to participate on the national women's hockey team with Team Canada. So she's Manitoban, she's Aboriginal, she's breaking barriers. She's a phenomenal hockey player, defenseman. We see it here again in Manitoba. Zach Whitecloud, Aboriginal from Sioux Valley Dakota Nation. He's playing right now. Great hockey. Scored last night with the Vegas Golden Knights in the playoffs, a team that's made up of 5 different Manitobans. So we do see it. Carey Price, a goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens, probably the best goaltender in the world. He's of Aboriginal background, and he's really thriving again against a very strong playoff opponent. So we do see it. We just don't see it enough.
And I think a big barrier to access as well is just financially. Hockey's a very expensive sport to play. And we know that people of color, Indigenous people, Black people, they experience, higher rates of poverty, unfortunately, than non people of color population. Um, and this brings us into our next topic. So you talk about the IIHF, the Women's Hockey League, that was canceled because of COVID. So can you talk more about this and just how women and non-males in hockey are just they're not getting the funding they need to actually play the game?
Yeah. So this I could talk about this all day. There's a lot of conversation points here. Like you mentioned, the IIHF, International Ice Hockey Federation, uh, governs something called the Women's World Championships, and that is bringing together of the best nations in the world uh, come together and play tournaments of women's hockey. It's done every year. It wasn't done last year. It was canceled, unfortunately. It was supposed to be held in Halifax and Truro, which is Nova Scotia. Uh, Unfortunately, COVID was the culprit there, and much like everything else, 2020 had a lot of cancellations. Unfortunately, that was not rescheduled, and the Women's World Championships kind of went under the radar for a year. It was gone. It was put by the wayside. Forgot about it. Much like male hockey, that happened as well too. Then come, I guess this fall, we had the men's World Junior Hockey Championship held in Edmonton in the bubble that the NHL players used this last year in the playoffs in the summer. So they were able to hold their IIHF event. 18, 19, 20-year-old boys, men participating in many countries come together and play in a tournament. So that was held fine. We had the U18 championship down in Texas last month, where again, boys came together and played from around the world. And then set to run from, I think it was the 6th to 17th or so of May, we were supposed to have the Women's World Championship held again in Halifax and Toronto, Nova Scotia. And this time around, just 2 weeks prior, back in mid-April, an announcement came from the IIHF saying, unfortunately, we're going to have to cancel this year's event. There wasn't much in the release. There was a couple comments, and you know what? That was made news. People reacted exceptionally strongly to this, negatively, of course. Speaking of the reasons why this shouldn't have happened, why this is female hockey, it should get the same attention as male hockey. Only very recently did they say, you know what, this is a cancellation due to some restrictions based on COVID. So it's interesting that they said that, and they kind of fell back on COVID as the reasoning why they can't quite hold this event. Yet they demonstrated very clearly they could host the male event. They could host the boys event. Are people buying the fact that it was based on COVID restrictions, where we looked at Nova Scotia and they reported 7 new cases of COVID on that day, that the that the explanation fell? So it's sometimes reading between the lines. They did announce just last week that, you know what, we are going to actually call this postponed, not canceled anymore, and we do plan to host it in August, probably in Calgary, it sounds like, at the Winsport. So there is potential to see this tournament played out. They've agreed to do it again. So we are kind of lucky that the backlash, again, kind of created some of this positivity, much like we talked about earlier. It's weird that it takes such a bad thing to cause such a positive response. So the Women's World Championship sounds like it will be played. We don't know where. We don't exactly know the schedule yet, but it sounds like August 20th to 31st, probably in Alberta. So that is positive.
Good, yeah, and that's so strange that they would use the term cancellation if they really did mean postponing the event.
Yeah.
I never caught on to that, so that's really interesting.
Yeah.
About that issue, there's actually a quote that I came across from one of the players, Donna Spencer in the CBC interviewed Brianne Jenner.
Yeah.
And she was talking about this cancellation, and she said, quote, "If you're a young girl, the outcome is you are seeing no women's hockey games this year. If you are a young boy, you are not seeing the same," end quote. So what do these cancellations, postponements, whatever they want to call them, what do these tell young girls and young boys about women's participation in hockey and in sports in general?
quite bluntly, quite frankly, it means women's hockey doesn't matter. That's what it means. And that's totally unacceptable and unfortunate. Uh, when we see the backlash that we got after this cancellation, where almost every female hockey player I know, professionally and non-professionally, was weighing in on the subject, when male hockey players are weighing in on this, when male reporters were reporting on this, bringing about this as such an issue and a negative, that became, it really went into the overall scheme of things, and people took notice. That is the kind of coming together that we do need in this sport, that we do need in this culture where, you know what, women aren't ranked quite as highly as men, it seems, which is not right. So to have this type of backlash and to have this response has been positive. There have been positive changes about this. We've seen the past couple of years with the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association coming together, and you know what, we're taking a couple of years off from hockey because there's no league that will pay us right. Women are coming together, stepping aside from the game they love and saying, you know what, we're going to hold out until we get paid. Men are making a lot more money playing hockey than women are. Leagues have folded because they were female leagues. There's no other reason why they folded. They folded professionally because they were female hockey leagues. It's unacceptable. Leagues have tried to come together and branch and say, you know what, can we do this together? Well, one of us is a nonprofit, one of us is a for-profit. We can't quite make this work. Oh, will the NHL step in and help us? Will they help pay for this? We can ask. Sorry, the response has not been so positive. So it has been tough to watch this, to see this come together. But you know what? There are positive steps going forward. Right now, we're right in the middle of women doing some extraordinary things within the PWHPA. And women's hockey is something that we don't get enough of. There's no national coverage of it. The odd time we get stories here and there, very rarely we get television coverage. We could always use more. The collapse of the Canadian Women's Hockey League 2019 was not fun for anybody. The formation of the National Women's Hockey League was positive until it kind of clashed with the Canadian Women's League. And then we saw what has been the women coming together and forming the Players Association and saying, you know what, we won't accept that we don't have a sustainable professional league. And we aren't going to have the opportunity to be inclusive to all women to play hockey that is meaningful and paid for it professionally. So they've put together what they call the Secret Dream Gap Tour this past year. They did it last year. It was the Dream Gap Tour, but it's being held by Secret Deodorant, Sonnet Insurance, Scotiabank, Bauer, many other sponsors. And they've put together a showcase for the best female hockey players in the world who are currently fighting for equal opportunity to play hockey. And they've been holding out of professional hockey for so long. These players come together and they play 3 or 4 games in a city, then they move to a different city. It went through Chicago, Arizona, Philadelphia, Toronto, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Montreal last year. This year, they've been sponsored by National Hockey League clubs, so they're taking a big step forward. The New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, St. Louis Blues, Calgary Flames, they came together and they said, we will sponsor you to come and host 6, 7 games in our arena, nationally covered, with female commentators, with interviews, with television coverage to play, to gain attention and traction and draw the eye to female hockey. And that's where the best female hockey players are playing right now. They're doing it to gain attention so that people will understand that there is something out there other than the National Hockey League playoffs or the American Hockey League or the Western Hockey League, junior hockey for men. So there are a lot of positive steps being made, but it's just unfortunate how it always unfolds that these things have to come to be at dire circumstances.
Yeah, and you mentioned that a lot of women, women hockey players, sponsors, and whatnot, they see the importance of having women representation in hockey and letting women play hockey in Canada and across North America. To push women into the mainstream in hockey, to make them just as big as the NHL, what do you think needs to happen in terms of the male support within the NHL, audience support? Just basically, how do we get women hockey players to be pushed into the mainstream?
Yeah, you know what? A lot of that comes down to broadcasting. A lot of that comes down to having equal opportunity to get yourself on the national stage. We don't see enough female hockey programs. You turn on your television, I'm not sure you'll ever find a female hockey game unless you're at the perfect time where they are happening to play the Clarkson Cup final from 2019, a replay of that game. That might have been the last time you saw a female hockey game. Now, of course, they're doing the Dream Gap Tour, which is a sensational effort to get female hockey out there. But even when you're watching the Olympics, you don't get the coverage for the female team as you get for the male team, whether that's Canadian, whether that's United States. Canada, USA has had some sensational hockey games over the course of the past 15 years. And I'm talking the females. It has been back and forth, grinding hockey that is so emotionally charged. You might not see, you might, the team that loses, you wouldn't see someone not crying after that game. It's just that tough to be a loser in that situation where you're playing for your country and supporting your Olympic dream. And you see Canada US face off, and that's some of the best broadcasting you'll find. But then you'll look at the audience numbers and the viewers, and it's nowhere near what you'll see in the men's. So just the weight in some of this is difficult. Recently, CCM launched their new FTW line for the women. It's hockey equipment that's catered to the female body. It's the first time this has ever happened. It's absurd. This past year has been the first time that hockey equipment was made for females. They've just been wearing men hockey pants, men's shoulder pads, men's elbow
Wow.
pads. It doesn't quite fit that right. Like, shoulders are different, hips are different, legs are different, rib cages are different, chests are different. Everything is different. And it's taken this many years until one single hockey productive company has decided to take a step towards, making their equipment line a bit more inclusive. So, it's the little things. It really is. I hate to say that sometimes, but it comes down to, what's acceptable? What should we be pushing on people? Are we allowed to do this anymore? Should we not cater to the women? Should we not try to help them succeed? We've seen a lot of professional female hockey players step up and join CCM in their fight to be inclusive with their equipment, and I think that's a fantastic first step.
Well, clearly there's a long way to go considering that they just started making hockey equipment for women. That's ridiculous. But, we have a long way to go. What do you see happening right now within women's sports, women's hockey, men's hockey, that just really needs to be acknowledged as, this is good leadership. This is headed in the right direction. Who are the people out there really making a difference?
You know what? We've seen a lot of players step up, but we also have seen a lot of people in the media industry. And that's where I kind of fit in. I think that as a sports journalist, as a sports reporter, I have a duty to kind of make sure that we're getting equal coverage, equal access. In our magazine that we put out 6 times a year, 7 times on a non-COVID year, sometimes 8, we have a full section on female hockey. We're looking at a 140-page book on average, and we have at least 50 pages dedicated to women. Again, that's not an equal average. We're pushing it. It used to be 12, 13, 14 pages, and we're growing that section. We have seen a lot of scholarships handed out to players from the junior hockey leagues in Winnipeg and Manitoba the past couple of years. Players are excelling, exceeding expectations, excelling through their organizations, working towards end goal of maybe playing professional hockey at some point. And that's becoming all that more possible due to funding from schools, colleges, universities. So the players themselves are of importance for sure. But then there are people, again, on this side of the screen or the mic that do share the same passion. You don't have to look any further than TSN Sarah Leski. She's a sensational reporter. She covers hockey. She covers football. She does so year round. If she's not covering the Bombers, she's covering the Jets. If she's not covering the Bombers, maybe she's out in Edmonton covering the Eskimos, or the Edmonton football team, I should say. We see females excelling all around us. Sometimes you have to open your eyes to it. When you turn on your Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, your Sportsnet, CBC broadcast, you just might see fellow Manitoban, Jennifer Botterill, who began this year as a first-year analyst. And she has just really excelled in her role. providing insights as to what's happening on the ice, how players can relate this to their game, how young players can um, see what's going on the ice, how they can learn, work for change. Leah Hextall, another Manitoban from Brandon, she actually just accepted a huge deal to become the first female play-by-play hockey analyst in the United States for the National Hockey League with ESPN. So we do really have a chance to see some of these people excel. Cassie Campbell Pascal, she's been on Hockey Night in Canada for a number of years now, covering a lot of good aspects and brings a lot of maturity and experience to the Flames broadcasts as a former Olympic team captain and a person who's been within female hockey for a long time. We look at some of the reporters that are touted as some of the best in the world, not just because they're female or not just the best female reporters, but the best reporters. And we look at someone like Isabel Kirshadian, who used to work with the Washington Post, but because she was Russian, she worked so well with Alexander Ovechkin, Evgeny Kuznetsov, some of the Russian players there. She really made a name for herself before she left to go back to her home country for some more national coverage. But Emily Kaplan with ESPN is doing sensational work. Again, all the girls from TSN and Sportsnet on the sports desk, Ivanka Osmak, Kate Burness, Kaylee Gray. Carolyn Cameron has done really good work. And Sarah Sivian, working for The Athletic in Carolina, has brought such great personable content out of Raleigh that you haven't really seen such a style of reporting that Sarah brings to the fold, and has such a large audience and viewership for what she does on a daily basis. There are a lot of people making headway and getting their name out there and really doing women in sports justice.
It's great to hear that there's so many people that are committed to this cause, and getting women's sports into the mainstream. As much as there is a lot of work to do, we can see that there's a lot of work being done.
Right.
And I think that you're one of these people that are, you're out there, you're doing the work, you're writing the articles, you're researching these topics, and you're really you're doing the good work. So I think we're out of time. I'm not too sure. So I just want to formally say thank you for joining us. We appreciate your input. And yeah, I think that's it, how you end a podcast.
Hey, absolutely. I'm very pleased to join you guys. Thank you for the invitation. It's something I'm very passionate about and love to speak on. So anytime you need a voice, you need a comment here and there, let me know and I'll be happy to join you.